Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's time for another opportunity to spend the week with Wendy, talking real estate. Our newest show here on OC Talk Radio, This Week with Wendy, the only show where you'll find real talk about the SoCal estate of mind. With your host, Wendy Ross, who after decades of working at real estate brokerages in Silicon Valley and Orange County, decided it was time to create a real difference, a real estate business model that hadn't been seen here before. That's when she created Veracity Real Estate. The time was right for a renewed commitment to bespoke client advocacy at all price levels, seldom available within high-cost luxury markets like here in Southern California. Since then, Wendy's built a company of data-driven real estate investment advisors who are truth seekers and truth tellers. And today, well, we're hopeful she's going to share some of that truth with us. Wendy, you ready to share some truths?
Ready as ever. How are you, Paul?
I'm good. You know, the holidays are such a stressful period for me. We're pre-taping this one prior to Christmas here because everybody's on odd timetables. I just can't. I'm Scrooge. I can't wait for it to get over with. I'm sorry.
I'm kind of the same way.
Oh my goodness, there's so much confusion and chaos and everything here. And I would think though that the real estate market would just dry up and stop during the holidays.
You know what's funny is every year I get that question.
Yeah.
And historically, Orange County has had 2 annual surges. They have a peak in June and a second peak in December, and that's been the case for decades.
And that's, I know you'll talk about that in future shows, the different cycles of the market, but I would have bet money that the real estate transactions just stop and die because there's so much else on people's minds these days.
I think perhaps in other parts of the United States that's more true. You know, you have areas where there's weather, you know, and who wants to go trudging through the snow to look at houses, so of course things are going to taper off.
Right.
And in many parts of the country, most people are not entrepreneurial. You know, especially in the Midwest, you're going to see more parts of the population that they're employees.
Right.
You know, and they go to their place of work and they come home. So they don't think about the tax consequences of closing on real estate transactions within a certain tax year per se.
Well, I know you get technical today because you brought an attorney along, but before we go there, what's the market look like then right now?
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so before I get into that, let me just share that you know that you're going to get market analysis from me you can't find anywhere else.
That's for sure.
And part of the way that you get market analysis from me that you can't find anywhere else is because I surround myself with experts like Tony. So the reason that Anthony Burton is here today is he's going to share some insider information because like me, he and I both know that what you know matters. And your home is going to be the biggest and best part of your investment portfolio and your family legacy if you know what's going on. And a lot of folks in my industry don't want you to know what's really going on, but we do. So we're going to shed some light on that. So let me tell you a little bit about Anthony before I get into the market. Tony is the founder and managing partner of AWB Law PC. It's a professional corporation. He spent his year litigating and fighting on behalf of his clients, whether their needs arose from an injury, a real estate dispute, or a business dispute. He's basically out there to fight for the little guy, which is part of why I love him so. Anthony works really closely with his clients to evaluate the appropriate legal strategies and develop a plan that will help them accomplish their goals efficiently, because he's not just about billable hours. So we resonate on the same level, that we're about giving very strategic information to get the best outcome the fastest way possible, because money matters. He's a tireless advocate for his clients, and he's tried several jury and bench trials successfully, of course. And before we get started, let me just continue with my tradition before we launch into you, and I'm going to recap what's happening in the market. December 2021 has unfortunately, sadly, been super consistent with the entire year. There are just too many buyers and far too few sellers. And this month isn't quite over, but even already, we're seeing that there has been a massive year-end push, and I'm expecting this year to end with 15% more sales than normal for a traditional year in Orange County. I know that we're going to close with 15% more homes sold than last year, and last year was already record-setting, which was really just crazy. So far, we have 33% fewer listings than we did last year. We have 40% fewer than the year before that, and we have 55% fewer listings than the year before that. However, even with so many fewer homes available for sale, we sold 35% fewer than last year. So we're kind of trending with what we lacked in availability, we lacked in sales, because we're still absorbing at this insane rate. We're only about 19% fewer sales than 2019. But again, I'm going to wait for the absolute end of month, end of year figures to come in, because I might be wrong here. but already we're trending with 12% more sales in 2018. So it speaks to the vigor of this month. It speaks to the vigor of this year. And it speaks to the fact that COVID is still continuing to motivate people to live where they want to live. So the overall trend is continuing with, it's only taking us 8 days to sell a house in Orange County. That's insane. I mean, we're getting kind of, I think, numb to these figures, but we have to remember it used to take 30 to 40 days on average to sell a house. So for it to take 8, it's just exponentially insane. So far our median price is trending at $932,500. That's versus $790,000 December of last year. It's insane. It's nuts. So what blew my mind most was that we're seeing this trend of selling so many more homes than last year, when even last year we were so under inventoried. So when we get to the first show of next year, I'll have hard data for you, and we can all probably have a cocktail at the same time. So that's it for now. That's my market update. But as you know, every week I'm doing my darndest to bring the most notable of names to come and speak with me about what's going on. Again, to bring us that behind-the-scene market analysis, because we want you to know how to make the best home investment you possibly can. So that is why Anthony is here with us today. So again, thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me, Wendy.
So I have been dying to ask a real estate attorney like you about why all the new residential purchase agreement forms. What prompted that, and what's changed?
So the California Association of Realtors will give us updates every year about the changes in these forms, and we've started to see in the past couple of years some needs for these additional addenda that they've added to the form. So the standard form went up from 10 pages to 16 pages. Wendy, I know you already know that because you've already seen them. But for some of the listeners to know, that is quite a bit more than people are used to.
Right.
They've added some substantive changes and then some changes that I think are meant to address certain situations that we've continuously seen come up, especially since COVID hit.
And let me ask you, when you say we, do you mean attorneys overall or real estate specific attorneys?
Just real estate specific.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the first things people will notice is the grid that shows up in the very front of the agreement, and some people may think that's just meant to be a summary or active as a table of contents in some ways. It actually is substantive. So when going through and looking at these forms, it really makes a lot of sense to just double check to make sure all of the terms and everything match throughout the agreement. There are some additional forms that address co-ownership agreements as well, which is becoming a more common form of purchasing real estate these days.
And what exactly do you mean by co-ownership agreements?
So when you have multiple buyers going into a transaction together, there are some advisory notices that are included so that they're aware that they should have a co-ownership agreement before they go in and close the transaction.
And so you're talking about people who are not husband and wife?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Generally, when husbands and wives go and buy property together while they're married, it's assumed that it's community property unless there's something that says otherwise. And I think one of the reasons why they did this is because there are so many failed real estate deals that occur, not in the consummation of the purchase, but afterward, that occur, and it really increases to the amount of litigation that I have seen over the years. So you have a lot of people buying property, and it's either people who are close, like family members or really good friends, and they don't think to actually outline what the terms of their ownership arrangement is going to be.
That's really interesting. So they were on the front end trying to mitigate issues after close.
Yeah, which oftentimes don't really affect the seller, so I don't really think that was their goal, but it's more so issues with the buyers going forward in the transaction. So there's an advisory in there that the agreement doesn't actually constitute the co-ownership agreement. It advises the buyers to seek legal counsel, as they always do. And
said no one ever.
and it advises them to have a co-ownership agreement put together before the close of escrow. And
Sure. And that's funny because I have been a bit neurotic with my clients in the last decade or more when they go into co-ownership of a property. Let's just say it's boyfriend and girlfriend, and they've lived together for 10 years. And I'm so acutely aware because unfortunately I'm in business relationship with a lot of attorneys. So I get called in when there's a probate issue. I get called in when there's, a sudden disability. And I try to remind them, you love each other madly. You know that you're going to honor each other, but God forbid one of you is hit by a truck. And then the grieving family comes in and starts fighting with the other person. Do you really want that? So it sounds like what you're talking about is these agreements would potentially eliminate or quantify some of that, so it's a little bit more sane should something terrible happen later.
Yeah, and it doesn't just have to be death. A lot of what I see in a lot of the cases I get hired for are when these disputes get to the point where the parties really just can't coexist or work together anymore. One of the first things I ask is, well, did you document anything in writing? And the reason why I get kept so busy with these cases is more often than not the answer is no.
Wow. Now, are you seeing an uptick in these types of clients?
No. This has
Okay.
actually been consistently since I've worked in the real estate fields. This has always been a problem. I don't know why people don't think ahead of time to at least document some of the basic, ownership agreements between them. So invariably what happens is one party starts sharing more of the costs to maintain and own the property than the other parties. And then they ask them to, make it right. I've been paying X number of dollars over the years. We're meant to share this responsibility and the other side doesn't want to. Or that ownership right gets passed to a family member and they're not interested in fulfilling those obligations. And so
Right.
it inevitably turns into a fight or a court battle. And that's my thinking of what goes behind these forms that they put together, because I've read through some of them and it looks like these really would mitigate a lot of those issues. And
That's fascinating. See, as a perspective I never would have considered. So in these cases, in these disagreements that you've seen, is there a common thread over the types of things they're arguing about? Is it like percent of ownership or percent of cost, or is there consistency there?
There is almost invariably the ownership interests are going to be disputed in some way. Assuming we can get past that issue, then it becomes whose responsibility is it to pay for what expenses, or you've been deriving income from the property, but you haven't been paying the expenses the way you should, or you haven't been paying me what I'm owed as the other owner of the property. So those are some of the common things I see in virtually every case that comes my way.
And are you seeing that people are mediating and arbitrating successfully, or are they holding out for jury trials?
Well, when I deal with disputes that involve like the RPA forms that we're talking about, the real estate purchase agreements, the mediation's there because they're required in virtually every dispute. Those have been successful, I'd say maybe 30-40% of the time.
It's actually more than I expected.
And those are usually with the cases that are on the lower end of the damages.
Okay.
So when
In terms of cost?
Yeah, in terms of cost. So, or in terms of their out-of-pocket loss. So if it's less than a certain threshold, oftentimes it just practically doesn't make sense to spend potentially twice what you're going to get back, even on a good case. You know?
Right. Sometimes the principle of the thing doesn't make sense financially.
Right. And usually you can get with a good mediator, you can get both sides to kind of see that and then fashion something that is agreeable to both of them. So that's what I've just seen in the past. But obviously the vast majority don't,
Right.
as you were expecting.
Right.
And so those will usually then turn to litigation. And again, more often than not, those will often resolve as well. Once the parties get into the dispute long enough, they'll usually go to and try mediation again. And I do see quite a bit more success there than on the initial go around.
I had wondered, since a very good friend of both of ours has started arbitration as a more prominent part of their legal practice because of COVID, I wondered if more people were going from mediation and then stepping it up to arbitration to see if they can't resolve it that way before they go to trial.
I think it depends on how complicated the case is,
And
because
probably the dollars, right?
exactly, because arbitration is invariably more expensive than a court trial is.
Really?
Yeah, I mean,
Did not know that.
So you're typically paying a private judge several $100s an hour for everything from discovery disputes to the actual trial itself.
Wow.
Examining witnesses, and then if there are any other disputes that they need to be involved in to resolve, you're bringing it to their attention and you're paying them every hour for it, compared to a state court judge who's paid by taxpayer dollars to resolve these disputes for you.
See, and that's fascinating because that has long been one of my challenges with the California Residential Purchase Agreement, because there is a portion on there where it's boilerplate that it will go to mediation first. That everyone agrees to that, and if they don't, then they waive their chance to get their attorney's fees covered later, should they pursue other methods. But then it's become negotiable. Well, technically it's negotiable whether or not in advance you agree to arbitrate a future dispute. And generally speaking, I have not found sellers who are willing to accept a contract where the pre-commitment to arbitrate isn't agreed to. yet I feel like if more people understood it was more expensive, that maybe they would make a different choice. But then, is it faster? I mean, that's what we've been told.
It is, yes.
So at least it doesn't hold your house off the market while you figure out a jury trial.
Yeah, and these days, frankly, COVID has compounded the issue in terms of how often cases are going to trial.
Great.
The courts had to close down, then they had limited operations, and then they steadily started to get back to normal operations. But honestly, right now, I'm not seeing cases get sent out for trials until 2023 at the earliest.
Oh, my word. All right. Well, there's a word to the wise listeners. If you have a dispute, Lord forbid you do, may want to arbitrate it.
Yeah. So yes, you have to pick which benefit you want. Is it the less costly or the
Or
more time efficient?
expedience.
Yeah.
Right. That's fascinating. Now, I also wanted to know too, because I mean, selfishly, being a broker, and I've got my team of agents, and I'm responsible for every word that comes out of their mouth and every document they produce. I'm super, super vigilant about how we perform our agency disclosures, when we're doing our agent visual inspections in particular, and how we advise our clients on seller disclosures. And I'd love your feedback on this, because one thing I have said to everyone, clients and my agents alike, is over disclose. If you're only supposed to talk about what you know from the past 5 years, but you know someone, for example, died 7 years ago, disclose it. How does that hurt you? If someone moves into the house and they find out from the neighbors that, Aunt Bertha died in 2013 and they didn't mention it because legally they weren't required to, wouldn't that be kind of dumb, and it could cause problems that are unnecessary?
Sure, and in the long run, it could save them from a potentially lengthy legal battle, even though, like you said, legally they're in the right by not disclosing it. But I've always gone with the rule of thumb that if you don't want to tell someone about it, tell them about it. There's usually a good
Right?
reason why you don't want to tell them about it, and sometimes they can be relatively minor things. Like me and the neighbor had a dispute about the fence. They think it should be located a few inches over. We did a survey and we're in the right, and give them that information. At least they know about it in advance.
Right.
I've had quite a few cases over the past year or two, since people have been at home more often, where these neighbor disputes come up. And I had one client in particular that advised me that apparently the whole neighborhood had an issue with their neighbor, and the seller didn't tell them about it.
With one particular neighbor?
One particular neighbor.
So, yeah, and this is the kind of thing that it's kind of a gray area, because in the disclosures, for those of you who haven't bought a house in a few years or didn't memorize your documents when you did, because who did, there is a place where a seller needs to document any neighborhood nuisance. And that's a pretty broad category. So is this where you would have suggested it might have been smart to say something about that neighbor, or is that a libel situation?
No, I think it would have made sense. I can't imagine that the person living next to this individual prior to my client buying it had zero issues with this neighbor, because I've spoken to several other people in the neighborhood, and it seems like inevitably you're going to run into this person and you're going to have a problem at some point. And right now, our dispute is over our client just maintaining their fence. They just want to have a contractor fix something on the fence, and the neighbor just will not let them do it. And they tried to have the contractor do it in a creative way that didn't affect the neighbor, and it prompted them to come out and start a dispute where the police got called. And I'm like,
Wow.
it's not your fence. I don't know why the neighbor would be so upset about it, but that kind of mentality just tells me that there's someone who oftentimes just unnecessarily, increases the how difficult the situation is going to be. And so that's unfortunately why they're in the situation they're in now.
Wow.
But yeah, that's something that I would advise someone. Yeah, you should disclose that if you've had issues with the neighbor in the past.
That's interesting, because it brings to mind a client that I had a little over a year ago. She asked me to help her sell an investment property, and it was a pretty low-cost property, and it was cash flowing, and I asked her why, and she said, honestly, I just can't deal with the neighbor anymore. The woman next door is making me crazy, and she's doing this, and she's doing this, and she's got cameras directed at my backyard, and blah, 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 blah. And she chose to tell the buyers who came along, I had a problem with this neighbor with regard to my pets, with regard to this. She didn't get into really granular detail, but said that there were some cameras that I felt were facing my yard inappropriately, and she had issues with my dog. So at least she made reference to it, so they came in knowing might want to make nice with that neighbor. So.
And I think that the way they handled it is probably the best way to do so. Obviously, you don't want to get into too much detail, because then, you do get in a situation where now the neighbor hears about it and thinks you're going around saying things to harm their reputation.
Mm-hmm.
Which obviously that wasn't the purpose of it.
No.
But I think just telling them, generally we had this dispute in the past and want to make sure you're aware of it. I think that is obviously the safer approach.
Well, that's good to hear. It's tough. And I'm curious to get your take on agent visual inspection disclosures. Are you seeing that come up where past buyers are saying, I was not aware of, and the agent should have told me? Or have we been doing a good job in that regard?
You know, I hear a lot of people say that the agent should have known.
Mm-hmm.
What I often will ask them is, well, you believe that for a certain reason. Now, agents aren't perfect, and it's not their house either. So
Right.
the agent is not going through checking the foundation or opening up the vents or the walls or anything like that. So, the basis for liability for a seller is what they actually knew. So did they have knowledge that there was an issue with the property and they purposely refused to disclose it? And then the selling agent is entitled to rely on the representations of our client unless there's something that they knew that should have told them differently. So if there was objective evidence of an issue and they didn't bother to ask about it or kind of buried their head in the sand, that's where agency liability can come up.
Exactly. You're expected to be reasonably competent.
Correct. But if there's nothing there to indicate that you as the agent think that there's a problem, when your client tells you something, it's very unlikely that there's going to be a basis of liability from the agent standpoint of not disclosing something. So because the agent's kind of one step removed from it. So I think
Hopefully.
Hopefully. It's generally much more difficult to hold them responsible for something like that than the actual seller who's been living in the house every day, has been repairing the property and maintaining it, and therefore is going to be in the best position to have knowledge about those issues. So
I don't know if I told you this story because you've been to my home. What Mick and I didn't know when we bought the house, I was super excited because my back wall backs up to a church parking lot. And I thought, how great. There's not going to be any noise except on Sundays. I'm totally down with that because I work from home a lot. And the seller's daughter was their broker. And they were a close-knit family, and she was there a lot. And after I moved in, that was when I learned there's a Montessori school in said parking lot behind my wall, and that they throw every neighborhood holiday party there in that parking lot. So the mariachis and the Christmas carols and the Halloween party. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So I feel like she would have known, but I was going to let her slide on that one because now it's just more festive than I had prepared myself for. Oh my goodness. So something else that I heard a couple of years ago, and I haven't heard as much noise about it since, is a misrepresentation of the size of property, both the structure itself and the land upon which it sits. And what some people, especially people who have moved here from out of state, don't know is that it's not common practice here to get a survey. That's common practice almost everywhere else. And it's kind of hard even to find a surveyor here. You really have to look for one because there aren't as many. Are you hearing issues and arguments about that? And have you given advice about how to disclaim that, especially on an agency perspective within the MLS and other advertising?
To be honest, the only time I've seen it come up is when I was representing the prospective buyer in a failed transaction. And the MLS listing did have the square footage of the actual structure misrepresented. I don't believe the size of the actual property itself was misrepresented. But the issue on our end is that we were trying to come up with a determination what our client's damages were because the seller misrepresented the state of title when they offered to sell the property and our client agreed to buy it.
Oh, Lord help us.
And had the square footage been properly represented, it actually would have affected what our client's damages were, but we had to go with what the actual square footage was, and it was about 400 square feet smaller. So it brought down what our potential measure of damages could be in that situation.
Interesting. Do you know where the agent derived the square footage figure from?
As far as I can tell, it's from the seller.
Okay. Because something that a lot of people don't know is that when an agent inputs a new listing into the MLS, the first thing it asks us to do is put in the assessor parcel number. So when we put that in, it will automatically pull through the assessor records dimensions. And we don't go out there with a measuring tape and challenge it. We assume that the assessor has it down correctly, but they don't always. So it can be a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So
sometimes the people will make additions or changes to their home, and that will change the square footage of the home. Some people don't always tell the assessor about that either. So
right. Well, and also something that I have seen is that many times the assessor's square footage is derived from the builder records and the original builder plans. And a home can easily vary a couple hundred square feet if a wall was just inappropriately laid about a foot too close and it ran the whole length of the building, upper and lower floors. That can be 400 square feet discrepancy there. And we've seen that. So that the tract plan could have this square footage. And then you'll find later when somebody refinances it and they get an appraiser out there who actually measures it that there's a disparity. So it's been kind of tricky, and something that I know I tell my team and I tell people is you can't take the square footage that you see in the MLS as gospel. It's an approximation, because we're not out there measuring properties ourselves, neither is the seller. We're relying upon who we think are responsible third parties like builders and the assessor. And unfortunately, to your point, somebody could have added a room or made a change that the current owner was unaware of.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, I haven't seen a lot of that happening. I think that your team is taking some good advice there, though.
We are as neurotic as they come.
And frankly, I think that's a better way to practice.
That's awesome.
You assume things can go wrong, then they're less likely to in the future. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, I'm not done with you. I have many, many more questions, but first, let's take a quick break. So, Paul, please, would you tell us about our sponsor this week?
I'm happy to. I'm all engrossed in this, though. When I got some questions when we come back here, because you brought up a lot of stuff here. Let's talk about your sponsors, though, because you do certainly surround yourself with good people, like your great guest today here. And one of those sponsors is Ford and DiIulio. Ford and DiIulio is an Orange County-based boutique litigation firm with experienced attorneys from big law firms. The partners founded Ford and DiIulio on a simple concept of aligned interest, where their success is directly related to the value and results they achieve for you, where they're rewarded for being efficient and effective, not just running up the bill, and where they engage in a relentless pursuit of their clients' goals, whether in litigation, mediation, or even a trial. If that's the kind of representation you're looking for, then you can find them at FordandDiulio.com, FordDiulio, FordandDiulio.com. Wow. You guys, can I just interject for a second? I know you got a lot to talk about here, but I'm rattling down things and writing them as you're saying here.
That's fantastic. Bring it.
Give me a couple. Let me give you a couple here. You were talking about Aunt Sarah died in her house. I got to tell people Aunt Sarah died in the house?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, certain cultures absolutely have a problem with that. Yeah, and that's not something that you want to hide.
I didn't know that. I guess I should have, because my parents, I inherited a house out in the desert, and my parents didn't die in the house. They died in the hospital.
That's a different story.
And when we rented out, there was a question they put in there that we had to disclose that nobody had died in the house. And I was like, who cares? Whose business is that, whether they died at home or whether they died in the hospital?
Well, my house was built in 1947, and back in the day, everyone died at home.
Everyone died at home, yeah,
so
exactly.
People came to me and they're like, oh my gosh, your husband died in the house. You're going to have to disclose that. I'm like, I'm not really worried about it.
So I didn't know that. Okay, that was one. And then it never occurred to me that the size could be wrong. The builder told me this is it. We just assumed the builder measured them all right here.
Oh, because they're all perfect.
They're all perfect. I would never think of this. And all of a sudden they changed and nobody thought about it. Or somebody down the road had made an alteration and added something you didn't think about it and know about it.
Especially in my neighborhood. These homes were built post-war. If somebody made a change in the 60s, the current owner may not even be aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
So, yeah.
Lots of stuff to get into. All right, well, I'm beginning to realize I should have gotten an attorney involved in a lot of these things. I had no idea. I just signed on the dotted line and moved in. That's all I did.
Now you know Tony.
Now I know Tony.
And you're welcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
All right, so enough with the business stuff, because Tony knows I'll pick his brain all day, every day, because I'm that nerd, and I torture him. But I love to ask my guests questions, kind of like the Proust questionnaire, what you would have seen in Vanity Fair, just to get to know the person. We've gotten an insight into the professional. We know we can call Tony and get our real estate questions answered or our other contractual issues addressed. But I want to ask you personal stuff. So let's start with, what city do you call home?
Fountain Valley.
And how long have you lived there?
I moved there at the end of 2020.
It's a great city. In fact, I don't think people understand it's kind of an unsung city. It has won many awards nationally in terms of safety and quality of life. So what do you like most about living there?
Other than the fact that it's a nice place to live, I really enjoy the diversity of the food options there.
Oh, nice.
So my wife's Filipino, and my kids have become accustomed to eating a lot of different things, and it is nice having things so close to us.
Right.
So we at least have a lot of options as far as what we can eat. We're big into food, so.
And it's super close to the beach, too. People don't understand. It's a hop and a skip, and there you are.
It's also really centrally located to a lot of things in Orange County. So the location, the weather is always really nice. Other than lately, it's just been a little cold. But aside from that, it's...
Well, it is December.
Yeah. It is getting into the 50s, and we don't like that here.
And I admire people who buy in these older bedroom communities. Again, like mine, I live in a historic neighborhood in Santa Ana because we have such a low cost basis. Your property taxes are the lowest possible in Orange County. No homeowners association in most cases. So good for you.
Yeah.
Very, very smart. Okay. So tell me about you and your stuff. Do you have a most prized and treasured possession?
I actually do. My brother-in-law works in as a financial advisor, and he works one of the trading desks there. So they always get a lot of these gifts from some of the vendors and people that they work with, and he got this nice Yeti coffee mug. And I place value on things that I get to use a lot, and I use it every single day, and I can understand why people spend so much money on these things, because they keep things so hot and so cold for so long. I mean, I can forget my coffee that I have on my desk because I could be in a court appearance or something, and then an hour and a half later I pick it up, and it's still just as warm as when I put it down.
So those little daily creature comforts, a la your brother-in-law. Yeah. That's fantastic. So. I hope he's listening. So aside from all the obvious, I mean, you're a highly accomplished attorney, you're a father. Of everything you've done so far, what do you consider your greatest achievement or achievements?
Well, aside from my kids, I'll put them at the top of the list.
That's fair.
I'll go with the professional one. So in my bio, it does indicate that I do like to fight for the little guy, and so I am a previous personal injury attorney. That was what I started my practice as.
That's massive.
Yeah, so I graduated in 2009, and at that time, there wasn't a lot of opportunities to go into a lot of government agencies, which is what I had planned on doing. And so this was another way for me to get into the courtroom, which is really what I wanted to do. And so a few years into my career, I got a chance to do my first jury trial. And it was a young man in his mid-30s, and he had been riding on his motorcycle, and he had been cut off. And there was a dispute about how the accident happened and then what his resulting injuries were. So he had had surgery on his knee. He had had a couple of broken bones and a muscle tear in there. And he was essentially going to have a limp for the rest of his life. They couldn't get it to go away. His father owned a flooring business and had planned to give it to his son when his son had been working with him. Part of the issues with flooring is you're on your hands and your knees a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So he literally couldn't do that work anymore. So he had to move on to something else, and his dad just decided to close the business. So he lost the ability to continue, one, working with his father before he retired, but two, to take over the family business.
So the legacy was ended.
Yeah. So that was really what our case was about. And the issue with the disputed liability was that the other driver said that our client essentially ran into him while the driver's at a dead stop on a motorcycle going 40 to 50 miles per hour, which easily would have killed him. And so the other driver had taken photographs of our client after he had crawled out of the roadway, and he was sitting on the sidewalk. This location was about 50 yards or so from where they claimed that the accident happened, and there were also markings in the roadway that were consistent with where our client had said he turned his bike
and skids and stuff.
Yep. So he got offered $3,500 before trial, and we got a judgment of over $200,000 for him.
That's fantastic. And that is why people call you. Yeah. Because you dig in and you don't just stop and go, oh, good enough, you're moving on. No, because somebody's life has been permanently affected by that. Yeah. I think that's wonderful. So I don't know if that has influenced you in any way. Have you adopted a personal motto of any kind?
Yeah, I actually have. I am always prepared for the unexpected.
Well, that makes sense.
We're both business owners, and as we know, best laid plans never seem to work out the way they can. So all you can do is be prepared for is many things in the future that are going to be coming your way.
Mm-hmm.
The more prepared you are, then the less likely it is something that doesn't happen according to plan is going to throw you off from.
Hope for the best, plan for the worst, right?
Yep.
Yeah. See, and spoken like a father that's responsible.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what life is going to bring.
Yeah, that's true.
So I hope that life only brings you joy and opportunity and success.
You as well.
Yes. Thank you. And I'll be calling you on the daily, so.
That's okay. Call me anytime.
Thanks, Tony. All right. That is going to be it for us for today. So I invite everyone to please join us next year. It's going to be, next week. Not quite next year, but I'm going to have my year-end wrap-up and my predictions for what's going to come in 2022. And stay tuned.